as I sat in our quiet living room, surrounded by the familiar comfort of home. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that has been growing inside me for weeks. Though I didn't know at the time, I was just 10 years old, a cheerful little girl who loved playing outside and reading storybooks. My name is Julie, and I lived in a quiet town with my parents. My father, Pastor Godwin, and my mother, Pastor Maria, were respected members of our community around the church in our town, helping people and spreading kindness. I was their only child, and they loved me deeply. Though their busy schedules often kept them away from home because of their commitments, they hired someone to tutor me after school. It was not a stranger. It was a close family friend and a devoted church member. His name is Uncle Toby. Everyone loved him, including my parents. Julie, my mother, said one morning as she prepared breakfast, "Uncle Toby will start teaching you after school today. He's very good with children, and we know you will learn a lot from him." "Yes, Ma," I replied, smiling. I didn't think much about it. To me, it was just another friendly face from church. That afternoon, after the school bus dropped me off, I found him waiting at the house. My parents had given him a spare key, so he could come in before they got back from church duties. "Hello, Julia," he greeted me warmly. "How was school today?" "It was fine, Uncle," I replied, setting my school bag down. He smiled and sat at the dining table opening his books. "Good, let's start with some maths, shall we?" At first, everything seemed normal. It was patient and kind. Explaining things when I didn't understand, I liked how he made learning fun. But after a few days, something began to change. The first time something felt strange, I didn't know how to describe it. It started with small things during one of our lessons. As I was working with my stuffs, Uncle Toby leaned closer than usual. Julie said, his voice soft, "You are such a smart girl." I looked up and smiled. "Thank you, Uncle." He patted my shoulder, leaving his hand there for him a moment. I didn't know what to make out of it, but I decided not to think much about it. Besides, he was my teacher, someone my parent trusted. But as the days went by, his action became harder to ignore. One evening, as I was writing in my notebook, he reached out and took a strand of my hair behind my ears. "You are very special, Julie," he said. I couldn't understand what it was trying to say, but I faked a smile. "Thank you, Uncle." Then he placed his hand on my lap, which rested there for about 10 minutes. I couldn't figure why he had to do that, considering there is a large dining table and chairs in front of him. That night, as I laid in bed, I felt uneasy. I didn't understand why his words and touch made me feel uncomfortable. I told myself that maybe I was just imagining things. After all, Uncle Toby was a trusted member of our church, someone my parents admire. Surely he wouldn't do anything wrong to me. A week later, in school, we were taught the parts of our bodies that we shouldn't allow anybody to touch, which was all the parts Uncle Toby has been touching. I felt a knob in my stomach, as Mrs. Rachel, my auntie, described all those parts. But when I got home, things escalated. It was a quiet afternoon and I had just come back from school. As usual, Uncle Toby was waiting in the living room for our lesson. "Welcome, Julie," he said, smiling as I walked in. "Good afternoon, Uncle," I replied, setting my backpack down. We started the lesson. But halfway, he paused and looked at me. "Julie," he said, "you trust me, don't you?" I nodded hesitantly. "Yes, Uncle." He smiled. "Good. I want you to think of me as your second father. I care about you a lot." I didn't know what to say until late at night. One evening, after a particularly long day at school, I came home to find Uncle Toby waiting as usual. This time, he locked the door behind me. "Julie said, his tone too casual. Let's sit in the living room today instead of the dining table. I hesitated but obeyed. Sitting on the head of the couch, he sat beside me much closer than I was comfortable with. You have been quiet lately, he said, his hand resting in between my thighs. Are you upset with me? No, uncle, I quickly replied, shifting slightly to the side. Good, he said, his hand still in between my thighs. You are a very special girl, Julie. Don't forget that. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But I couldn't move. I felt trapped, suffocated by his presence. That night, as I lay in bed again, tears streaming down my face, I knew I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. But how can I tell my parents? They trust this man so much. And they love and adore him like their own son. He is a trusted and devoted church member, and I am just a child. Besides, my mother and father are never around. Whenever they are around, it's either Bible study, or we are having a devotion. I thought about talking to my class teacher, but I didn't know, for some reason it felt too weird to say it out loud. The next day, I felt sick. My stomach churned as the school bus drove closer to my home. My friends chatted around me, laughing about something that had happened in class. But I couldn't focus. All I could think about was a locked door, the heavy silence, and the way Uncle Toby had his hand lingering in my body. When I stepped off the school bus, I wanted to run away from that point. But I didn't know where to go. Instead, I walked slowly to the door, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't be there. But there he was, smiling as he unlocked the door. Welcome back, Julie, he said, holding the door open. I mumbled a quiet good afternoon and stepped inside. This time, I didn't even bother taking out my books. Uncle, I'm tired today, I said quickly. Can I rest for a while? He frowned slightly but nodded. Of course, you've been working so hard lately. I went to my room and closed the door behind me. For a moment, I just stood there. My heart was racing. Then I grabbed a piece of paper and pen for my school bag. I don't know what made me write the note. Maybe it was desperation. Or maybe it was a tiny voice inside me that refused to stay silent. All I knew was that I couldn't carry the secret alone anymore. The words spilled onto the page. Mommy, Daddy, I need to tell you something. Uncle Toby makes me feel uncomfortable. He touches me in ways that made me scared. Please don't let him come anymore. I folded the papers and slipped it into my mother's Bible, where I knew she would find it during an evening prayers. Then I sat on my bed waiting, praying that I had done the right thing. Do you think Julie's parents will believe her? If you were in her parents' shoes, would you believe your child? That evening, my parents came home as usual. My father kissed my forehead and asked about school, and my mom hummed as she prepared dinner. Everything seemed normal, but my heart was pounding. After dinner, my mother picked up a Bible and opened it. I watched her closely. My hands clenched tightly in my lap. When she found the note, she paused, her brows furrowing. What's this? She asked out loud. I froze, unable to speak. My father looked over, curious. What is it, Maria? He asked my mother. She unfolded the paper and began to read. Her face changed as she read the first confession. Then shocked, and finally, a deep angrily sadness. Julie, she said, her voice trembling. Come here. I stood slowly, my legs feeling like they might give out. What is this? She asked, holding up the note. Is this true? I nodded, tears streaming down my face. Yes, Mommy, it's true. My father's expression darkened. Julie, are you saying that Toby has been doing this to you? I nodded again, unable to speak. My mother let out a cry of anguish and pulled me into her arms. Why didn't you tell us sooner? As she whispered. I was scared, Mommy. I said, my voice barely audible. I thought you wouldn't believe me. My father stood up abruptly, his face a storm of emotion. Without another word, my father grabbed his phone and walked outside. My mother held me tightly, whispering, "It's okay, my baby. It's going to be okay." The next day, everything changed. My father had held a meeting with the church elders, and my mother stayed home with me, refusing to let me out of our sight. When my father returned, he looked tired but determined. "Toby has been removed from the church duties," he told my mother. Was he denying everything? Of course, he is, my mother said bitterly. A monster like that will never admit to his sins. That evening, my father knelt before me. "Julie," he said, his voice gentle, "we believe you. We are so sorry this happened to you. And we will do everything we can to protect you. Do you understand?" I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. I felt relieved for a long time in a while. The days that followed were both a relief and a nightmare. Uncle Toby never came to a house again, and I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known in weeks. But the weight of everything that had happened still lingered. At church, whispers started to spread. People noticed that Uncle Toby was no longer leading the choir and organization in the youth program. Some asked questions, but my parents remained tight-lipped. One Sunday after service, I overheard a conversation between two women. "Have you heard?" one of them whispered. "Pastor Godwin removed Brother Toby from his duties." "Why?" the other woman asked. "No one knows for sure," the first woman replied, "but there is a rumor that something happened in his house." I quickly walked away, my heart pounding. Even though my parents had promised to protect me, the thought of anyone finding out made me feel sick. At home, my mother noticed my unease. "Julie, are you okay?" she asked gently. I hesitated. What if people find out? Mommy, what if they don't believe me? She pulled me into her arms. "Julie, listen to me. You did nothing wrong. If anyone dares to say otherwise, they will answer to us and to God. Do you understand me?" I nodded, but the fear didn't go away. A week later, my parents decided it was time for me to talk to someone who could help me heal. "Julie," my father said one evening, "we are taking you to see a counselor. Her name is Mrs. Veronica. She is a kind woman who helps children who have been through difficult things." I didn't want to go at first. The idea of talking to a stranger about what had happened terrified me. But my parents assured me. "She is here to help, not to judge," my mother said. "And you can tell her as much as little as you want." Reluctantly, I have agreed. When I met Mrs. Veronica, I was surprised by how warm and kind she was. She didn't rush me or force me to talk. Instead, she gave me crayons and paper and asked me to draw whatever I wanted. At first, I didn't say much. But over the next few sessions, I started to open up. I told her about the lessons with Uncle Toby, the strange thing he said, and the times I felt scared and trapped. "You are very brave, Mary," she said after one session. "What happened to you wasn't your fault. And you didn't deserve it. But talking about it shows how strong you are." Her words stayed with me for the first time. I began to believe that maybe I wasn't broken, that maybe I could heal. As the month went by, I started to feel lighter. The nightmares became less frequent. And I began to find joy in the little things again. Playing with my friends, reading my favorite books, and spending time with my parents. One evening as we sat together after dinner, my father said, "Julie, I want you to know something. What happened to you was terrible. But it doesn't define you. You are strong and we are so proud of you." It's worth bringing tears to my eyes. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope. My family and I made a new promise to each other. To always listen and always believe. And to always protect one another. It didn't erase the pain. But it made me feel less alone. And so, step by step, I began to heal. Whispers of what happened would always remain. But they became a part of my story. A story of courage, love, and the power of speaking health. Thank you for watching this video. And please do not forget to like the video, subscribe, and leave a comment for her.